Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited to be here, and I have a presentation that I've modified the end of it to really adapt and focus on student supporting youth through this specific pandemic and COVID-19 and helping with virtual learning. But we're going to go through just so much content. I'm going to get through as much as I can, and I would love for people to interact as much as possible. I know that it's really unusual times and it's draining, the more Zoom things that you do. I had 4 hours of Zoom training myself today through Maple Shade, which is where I teach. But just participate. You can always unmute yourself or throw your comments in the chat. Like Bobby said, I teach art at Maple Shade, grade 7 to 12. I've been there for 10 years. It's my 13th year teaching. I also adjunct at the College of New Jersey, and I teach gender and pop culture and LGBTQ issues in K to 12 education. So I'm in both worlds. I have dual degrees in art education and women's and gender studies. So we're gonna have a great presentation today, and I'm excited to have you with me. The agenda that we're gonna follow, and the new part, if you've seen I don't think any of you have been in my presentations before. If you have, it's gonna be similar, but the end obviously focuses on supporting remote learners. But before we can even get to that, we need to tackle such a layered topic as just LGBTQ youth and a braver space. We have to follow a couple of guidelines. So I'm going to start by breaking binaries. We're going to understand intersectionality, talk about pronouns and language, creating an equitable classroom with braver spaces, laws and lesson plans, and what these are little seeds. So I'll give you lots of information, and especially if since this is recorded, you can look later and do even more research depending on what your focus is, and then we'll support remote learners. Alrighty. I always start with this painting I created to kind of set the tone for these presentations. So when you look at this painting, what do you see? You can unmute yourself or type it in the chat. Oops. Oh, anybody? Do we see, if you had to title the painting, what would you title it? Anything? Are we there? Hello? Diversity, thank you. Anybody else? Anything else? What do you see? Good, a couple of you are thinking diversity. Anything else that stands out? A typical classroom, looks like a modern classroom, excellent. We're in this together. Thank you, these are great. Okay, so keep adding in your input, or again, you can always unmute and shout your thoughts. So this painting was originally called Safe Space. No American flag, I like the pride flag, and love is love. This was painted prior, yes it was, it was absolutely painted prior. You can even feel the tightness in the walls, right? So this was painted actually right after the landmark moment, the landmark time of the Tyler Clementi bullycide, which really shook the New Jersey, it shook the world, but it really shook the New Jersey public school system. Does anyone know who Tyler Clementi is, or what his story is, why he's important, or why that might have inspired a painting? Rutgers student. Yes, he was the Rutgers student who was a victim of bullycide, and that's a term that really grew around that time in the 2010 to 2012. And he was videoed, recorded on a webcam with so you're Rutgers. Anyone else a Rutgers alumni? Well, it definitely, I'm sure as a Rutgers, you really are familiar with the story. So what happened was he was videoed with having a male encounter with someone else, and by his roommate, and that was so traumatic for him that he then jumped off the bridge, and it was just horrible. This case led to more conversations about privacy, cyberbullying, and eventually was a big piece of the HIB law legislation that we know, right? Harassment, intimidation, and bullying. So in the corner here, this is Tyler Clementi. So this painting, originally called Safe Space, which has been renamed Brave Space, and we'll talk about that later on as well, features 18 children who were victims of LGBTQ bullycide or hate crimes. And I'll provide more information about their stories later. In the actual paintings, all on their desks is their biographies written, and it's each person, it's a failure of so many things. It's a societal failure. It's an educational failure. It's just, you know, we couldn't provide a safe space for them. We couldn't do enough. And that's why it's really important that when we talk about numbers and statistics, this is a group of transgender, non-binary, LGBTQ youth that didn't have the chance to thrive in school. Every student should enter school and be able to thrive and be their authentic self. That should be, you know, baseline, right? What I also like to point out is Carl Hoover in the middle, or Walker Hoover. He was 11 years old and never identified as LGBTQ. And this is really important because perception sometimes is more important than reality. So it should not matter, of course, regardless, right? It shouldn't matter how you identify. But even in this case, the student identified as heterosexual, but was perceived to be homosexual and bullied so much so that he took his own life at 11 years old. Horrible. So we keep these memories, these people as our inspiration for why we do what we do, because again, every student is more than just a number or a statistic. Same with LGBTQ youth. Now, a few of you noted the flag. I have Keith Haring references. Robert Indiana was a famous gay artist that created the Love is Love sculpture, or the love sculpture that you see in Philadelphia. Langston Hughes, a famous gay poet. Now, I say this because up until recently, very recently, so much history was lost. So everyone knows Langston Hughes. You learn about Langston Hughes, but you don't know that he's a gay man. And so when we talk about LGBTQ inclusive curriculum, we talk about adding pieces that were omitted from history. We're not rewriting things. We're just bringing things that were left out because of X, Y, and Z. And then Harvey Milk, and Hope Will Never Be Silent. So, anything else you want to ask or mention about the painting before I move on? And again, I painted this, I believe, in 2012. Okay, I'm going to keep going, but please jump in the chat or unplug or unmute. I love hearing everybody's input. So then the next two cases I'm going to talk about, and these are two other paintings I've done. We have Zakiya Gunn and Matthew Shepard. Is anyone familiar with either of these people? Yes, no, you could. Nope. Matthew, yes. Matthew. So what do we know about Matthew Shepard? Does anyone want to unmute or type in?
Hi. So I know with Matthew Shepard, this was maybe the 90s. He was beaten and I believe tied to a fence, which I'm assuming is the fence in the background, and was found the next day.
Yes, and I mean, it was a horrible, horrible scene, and it really broke into the media because there was hate crimes and violence towards the LGBT community forever, right? But this really changed the lens because it was so brutal and so heinous. So it was in 1998. He was in Wyoming. If anyone's heard of the Laramie Project, that was based on this whole incident. He was 21 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes, small, petite, maybe 110 pounds, small framed, and left to die on this, beaten and left on this fence. So the world was disgusted, right? It was one of those societal moments where it says, okay, enough is enough. You can't treat people this way. And there was lots of media, lots of spotlight, and lots of change. Okay, this is 1998. At the time, and this was researched by a professor at the College of New Jersey, within the 2 months after Matthew's passing, I want to get my numbers right. Yep, there were 507 stories in major newspapers and broadcast outlets. Okay, so Zakiya Gunn, most people haven't heard of it. I'm checking the chat and I don't see anyone's mentioned her. So we should really know about her because she was from Newark. Okay, so she was walking down the street with her girlfriend. This is 2003, I believe. She was a sophomore, 16 years old. Two men were harassing her, jump out of the car, stab her, and she dies on the streets of Newark, 16 years old. Now, we're not, what I like to say is we're not playing oppression Olympics, right? We're not saying what's worse, because both are horrible for different reasons. But the difference is nobody knows about Sekiogun. The same study that followed the media's response to Matthew Shepard that showed 507 stories, how many stories do you think were written about Sekiogun? And again, this is a 16-year-old student. There were 11. So that is the issue. That's the issue that I want to bring up too, because even when we talk about LGBTQ youth and when we talk about people in general, we have to talk about intersectionality, which I'll talk about that concept, meaning you have to consider not just gender identity, not just sexual orientation, but race, socioeconomic class, religion, all these other layers of identity, and they all matter. Does that make sense? Yes? Okay. Okay, so what I want to do now, and again, please let me know if I'm going too fast or if I'm open to any interruptions. So we're going to break our binaries and biases. When you look at these pictures, obviously these are optical illusions, right? So you should be able to see a profile, two profiles, and two people staring right at you as well, right? So you've got a side view and a front view, which is really clear. However, you can't see both at the same time. So that doesn't make me right or wrong. If I see a profile, I'm right. If I see a face looking at me, I'm right. But the other person can't see it at the same time. So why would I show these images? Anyone? I just want perspective, ding, ding, ding. And as an art teacher, that's one of my favorite concepts and words anyway, right? So perspective, it's really important because as I'm sure you've heard the phrase before, and the concept is there's always more to the story. There's usually three parts, the one side, two side, and then in between. So it doesn't make someone necessarily right or wrong, but we really need to empathize and learn about others' perspective and our own perspective and our own biases to really fully embrace and understand, again, our students in as their authentic selves, because there's going to be layers of their identity we might not understand, you might not agree with personally, or regardless, for whatever, but you still have to embrace their authenticity and try to understand their perspective. One of my favorite binary breaking activities is the Stroop effect, and this hyperlinks to other activities. So especially those, if you have more time or if you watch this training later, you can click on this and it'll take you to a couple activities. But the Stroop effect is when the left and the right brain fight. It is an activity where your logical half, right, our left side, and our creative half, our right side, feel that tension. So can I have somebody, Can I have somebody read the color, not the word, out loud as fast as you can? You can kind of follow my mouse. Anybody feeling participatory? Or we could do it together, or you could do it, in the room by yourself. So I'll do it out loud, unless, is there any takers? Okay, so we've got green. Do it with me. Green, yellow, red, black, green, blue, red, blue, blue, green. Oh, see, red, blue, green, black, green, yellow, black, green. So that should have been difficult for you. Obviously, I've done this activity multiple times and it's still hard for me. Did anyone do this activity and find it challenging? Yes, yes. Good. So it's challenging, and this is just a few words. If I had a full page of maybe, 100 words, your brain, you would actually be tired by the end of it. It's not because, you're not smart or you're not able to do this or that. It's because your brain, your left side, your logical side has been trained to see the color red is red. That's what red is. So when you're seeing the word blue in the color red, your two halves, your creative side that says, oh, that's okay, is being challenged by your logical side. So this applies to just gender binaries and gender stereotypes and stereotypes in general, right? Things that we learn and that our brains are woven to think so rigidly that we have to kind of untrain ourselves and challenge ourselves to think and perceive a little bit more. Okay. Any other thoughts on this? I like to also say one of my, a friend of mine who's transgender says their example of explaining what it's like to be transgender is waking up and putting on two left shoes, going to work with your two left shoes. Then, okay, I'm walking around all day, going to sleep, and you still have two left shoes on. So yes, you can walk, you can move around, you can function, but it wears you down and it's not the right fit. So even this tension, this challenging the color, your left versus your right brain, that tension is a good way to kind of empathize and feel if someone is born with the wrong, their mind and their body don't align. So when I talk about gender boxes, and I want you to either say the words or just shout them out into the chat or type them into the chat. So we're going to think about stereotypes of masculinity and femininity, okay? So what is masculine stereotypes? To act like a man. What are characteristics? Anything you have. Brave, courageous.
Strong.
Sports. What'd you say?
Strong.
Strong. Thank you. Power dominated.
Competitive.
Competitive. What else? Aggressive, money oriented. Good. So societally, we have a very similar, and it's changed a lot. I've been doing these presentations for a long time, and I've even, there's the stereotypes have been broken down a lot, but that's still rooted in, masculinity is built upon strength, and men, it's not as accepted societally for them to express emotion. They can only express one emotion, and what is that?
Anger.
Anger, exactly. And that's a problem. That's the problem. We need to be raising strong and sensitive men and women, right? And non-binary people. So when you look at the stereotypes now for women, what do you see? What are gender roles? What, if someone says act like a lady, what does that picture? If you close your eyes and you're visualizing, a perfect woman, what does that look like? What does she act like?
Soft-spoken, pretty, gentle.
Yeah, keep going. Anybody? Pretty, passive.
Courteous.
Courteous. Vain. Polite, nurturing. All right. So what happens is warm. These are stereotypes, and what happens is if these are called gender boxes, right? So if you fit into these gender boxes, it's going to be society will be easier on you. It'll be easier to succeed. So we're not saying if you're a woman who is polite and nurturing and passive, that's fine, but it needs to be just as equally acceptable for a man to be polite, nurturing, and passive as it should be for a woman to be strong and stoic, etc. So we have to break those boundaries, because what happens is, and this comes from the media, right? It comes from societal influences. You have young boys being told to bulk up, to get stronger, to get bigger, take up more space, right? Get more muscle. And you're having women, young girls, told lose weight, get smaller, shrink, take up less space, be more quiet. So there's already that disparity that hierarchy. And it shows when you have a little boy on the playground in recess, and what is said to him. What is the most basic insult? If he throws the ball and someone wants to insult him, what do they say to him?
You throw like a girl.
You throw like a girl. And so from kindergarten, or from what you say that at second grade, you're saying every single little girl on that recess field, you're using all that whole identity as an insult, right? You're using an entire group of people. So we're already setting that imbalance, which is why when it goes to LGBTQ youth, and I say, is it easier or is society easier on toward a masculine woman or a feminine man? Who has it harder? Feminine man or a masculine woman?
Feminine man.
A feminine man, right? Because what happens is we already have this hierarchy where we have masculinity as as dominant. So you have masculinity, femininity. Then if you have a woman acting more masculine, she's reaching up. If you have a man acting more feminine, he's reaching down. And then when you add in the other intersections of race and other identities, that's why you get to see, and you'll see the highest rate of violence and misunderstanding is towards trans women of color because of those layers. So again, we're not saying if you fall in these stereotypes, great, but we need to make society stronger and more accepting of people as they branch out from those rigid binaries. And so when I've done this activity before, I've done Poll Everywhere, or I handwrite it in, and you get these stereotypes, you get these lists of, the most common trait of a woman is emotional, and the most common trait of a man is tough. So I'm going to show this video. This was created by a student, not one of my students, but he was 15 years old at the time. And I just want you to think about, from a school perspective, gender roles. Let me know can you hear it?
Mhm.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Play us like pawns and relentlessly confined into living up to gender roles and having absent minds. Don't you think it's funny how they tell us how to live? Don't you think it's funny how we're all delinquent kids? Like, hush now, don't say, don't say. Hush boy, don't say a word. Throw on a jersey, no one gets hurt. Hush girl, just bat your eyes. Play our little game, play our little game. Rounded all thoughts and corrected common sense. You raising suicidals with your predetermined titles like a mess. Distressed, I am unimpressed. Your excess address is all you'll ever be. Gender roles impose control and deceit, progressive times. Welcome to the land of the broken mind. Hush boy, don't say a word. Throw on a jersey, no one gets hurt. Hush girl, just bat your eyes. Play our little game, play our little game. Hush boy, don't say a word. Throw on a jersey, no one gets hurt. Hush girl, just bat your eyes. Play our little game, play our little game. We feign opulence just to get by. Put on false confidence just to feel alive. They can't hurt me anymore. There's nothing left to break of me. There's nothing left to take from me. 'Cause baby, it's easy to fake a smile when you've been doing it for a while. Baby, fake a smile when you've been doing it for a while. Hush boy, don't say a word. Throw on a jersey, no one gets hurt. Hush girl, just bat your eyes. Play our little game, play our little game. Hush boy, don't say a word. Throw on a jersey, no one gets hurt. Hush girl, just bat your eyes. Play our little game, play our little game. Hush boy, yeah. Hush girl, me, put it on your leg. Play our little game, play our little game. Play our little game, play our little game. Play our little game, won't you play with me?
Right. So, and his friends were in the music video, so you can see it's all like younger models and students. And this is just kind of something to think about when you think about, before we go into this, gender roles. So did any of that stand out to you, or any memories pop up or thoughts? What's the message of that video in terms of gender roles and stereotypes? Even the title, Little Game.
The colors for me reminded me of my nephew. He's 3 years old, and his favorite color is pink. He loves it. He's completely obsessed with all things pink, and he likes to wear pink. And the fact that the music video made it so clear that girls should like pink and boys should like blue. He has to wear, a lot of times, like my sister-in-law will get him like a pink shirt from the girls section because he wants a pink shirt and they don't have any. And it just makes me think of stuff like that. Like, I'm thankful that my brother and my sister-in-law are very open about all this stuff, because otherwise this poor kid, as a 3-year-old, he doesn't understand gender and all that stuff, but likes pink, and if he had other parents, maybe wouldn't be allowed to wear it, or would be told that he can't because he's a boy and only girls like pink.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, from a logical perspective or an outside perspective, it's just, right, it's just color, but it has so much power. And there are some parents that, you're a little boy, you can't wear pink. And exactly what you said, he's 3 years old. So that's just, it starts so young. I mean, even the gender reveal parties, I'm sure you heard in the news that California is under wildfire, right? Because somebody exploded something into the air for a gender reveal party. So the gendering, the concept of blue is boys and pink is girls, starts before children are even born, and gender specific toys. Anything else in the chat or comments?
Yes, I said gender specific toys, and I mentioned that because sometimes you will have girls who like to play with toy cars and trucks. Boys like to play with like easy bake ovens or what have you. And then some parents may say, well, no, that's toys that girls play with, or no, that's toys what boys play with.
Absolutely, yeah. Someone says it seems exhausting when you don't fit the stereotype. And so as educators, whatever our role is, whether we're teachers, superintendents, any role in between, right? You or parents, you can't control what's happening at home. You can't control what they're seeing in the media, but you can control and set up your space. Now we're going to talk about, obviously, the space now, it's heavily virtual, right? We have some actual space, we have virtual space, and we need to, at a young age, still provide and break these stereotypes and allow students to play and explore different hobbies. And exactly like you said, boys playing with easy bake ovens and girls playing with trucks, and it shouldn't be there should be no disparity. Play with whatever you want to play with, and encouraging that, right? So the other slide, I'm just going to show this real quick too, another resource for you to look at. It's amazing. So it's PBS did a map, an interactive map, and I'll click just to show you what it looks like. And it's a map of gender diverse cultures, and you can actually click on any one place and it will can you see that? Hold on. You can click on it and it's going to give you, I wonder why it's grayed out. Oh wait, I think I have to, sorry. There we go. It will give you the description right here And actually that's the Fa-Fa-Fini, which is one of the diverse genders I listed in my sample. And so I could click here. And this is something I encourage, especially if you're a world language teacher. It's an excellent resource. And you can just see as I'm clicking around to show that, you know, what we think about gender, what we think about societies or children's roles with gender, it's all based on our Western ideas. Right here in New Jersey, right, we have male, female. There's more understanding for people who are transgender, but there's still a big uncertainty and confusion around people who identify as non-binary, and we'll talk about that and that language shift. But in other cultures, there's 5 gender identities accepted. There's 6. So it's just, and this could be, like I said, I have my other degrees in gender studies. So you could study this. There's so much more. This could be a whole separate conversation, but just even knowing that other cultures accept, embrace other identities and gender identities is something just to kind of keep tucked in the back of your mind. And again, this is an interactive site or an interactive presentation you can look at later on. We talked about genders a little bit in elementary schools or in schools. Oh, I see something in the chat. Let's see. Oh, it is interesting. I mean, and you could spend a lot of time just looking at that. And furthermore, back to the other gender identities, some cultures, the roles are based on need. So there was this small sect of people called the Sworn Virgins in Albania. And they were people born, their gender identity was female, born female, but in their culture, and this is a very rural area of Albania, but in their culture, women were not permitted to work outside of the home. So if there was no man in the house, or if their father died, or there was no brother or uncle, a woman had to take a vow of celibacy, become what was known as a sworn virgin, and then cut her hair and work as a man to provide for her family, which is something that your brain it's hard to even wrap around, because that's not, like here, it's these identities come from within. It's the people, children, you know, advocating for themselves, saying, I feel like this. This is a whole different gender role where the family says, we need someone to provide for our family. You need to be a sworn virgin. But that's a side note. So back to where I was. So how often is gender used? Thinking about things like, do you have muffins with mom? That can be isolating to a lot of kids for a lot of reasons. And while I'm talking about LGBTQ youth, you want to support LGBTQ families. And everybody's family looks different. Everybody's caring adults are very different than, you know, the student that sits next to them. So even just changing and shifting your language, and these are some examples: donuts with grown-ups, breakfast with buddies, coffee with, you know, thinking about that. And then as it works up higher, in high school areas, you know, when you have prom king and queen, is that really necessary, right? Or is it necessary to vote for 5 boys and 5 girls each year? If homecoming is supposed to be representative of students that do the most in the school, why isn't it just vote on who does the most? And one year it might be 8 female students and 2 male students. Just something to think about. What else? I mean, when you're dividing kids, even as you go virtual, when you start to divide students up, don't say we're going to have a girls versus boys day. That, you could say we're going to have a sun versus moon day, or we're going to have blue versus gold, things like that. Anything else you want to add to this concept, or that you can think of an example? Oh, I think someone's trying to talk. Is someone talking, but I can't hear? I might be missing. Okay, well, please type in the chat or unmute if you want to add to this. Okay, so let's also talk a little bit about intersectionality, advantage, oppression, privilege. These are terms that are really, especially intersectionality and privilege, are huge buzzwords right now, especially in education, and furthermore, anti-racist education. There's more content available now than ever, which is wonderful. And things like anti-racist education and supporting LGBTQ youth, all these things just make there's no like magic cure here. It's just understanding and representing more variety for students to see, because every student, you want them to not just thrive, but also have role models and examples, someone or something that is similar to them. So we can only represent what we represent, right? So majority of teachers are white female teachers. The majority of students in New Jersey are not white females. So if you are, depending on what your identity is, you need to make sure that you find examples and showcase more variety, right? The concept in teaching, it's called windows, mirrors, and doors. Has anyone heard of that phrase before?
Mm-mm.
No. So okay, so mirror, I'm reflecting what I am, right? You reflect yourself. Windows are, you create those representations of other things. So I always pick, when in art rooms, I pick artists of color, younger artists, artists from around the world, to show different types, because they're different than me and I want students to have different examples. So that would be what books are you picking? What scientists are you uplifting as role models? What in your math problems are you saying, Jose bought 5 apples, or Jose went to the store and bought 12 apples with his dad's. If he eats 6 apples, how many are left? Just by even saying dad's makes a difference in a word problem. That's very powerful. We're not saying rewrite everything, but that's providing more representation. And then the door is, once you've shown students different varieties, let them tell their story, let them explore and be their own advocate, as in a sense. So, who's heard of Kimberly Crenshaw? Anyone? Okay, so she is the leader of the concept of intersectionality, which was, so if you look at her quote, if we aren't intersectional, some of us, the most vulnerable, are going to fall through the cracks. And she did a dissertation in 1990, focusing on the legal protection of Black women. And what she found was there was an intersection there where these women were not protected legally because they weren't being protected by the sex or race, because there was a case where Black men were hired, but Black women weren't hired. White women were hired, but Black women weren't hired. So it was this crisscross. And actually, I could share that document out too. It's a really interesting. It's an interesting study, and it's showing, at the time it was called almost a double jeopardy or double protection. But these women weren't asking for double protection. They were asking for legal, to legally protect them. But at the time they weren't protected by race or sex. So it's looking at those intersections. And that's just, again, race and sex. But there's so many other intersectional identities to think about. This is a list. Now, this is not a fully comprehensive, but it's just some things to think about. And again, we're looking at an LGBTQ lens. But you've got systems of advantage, which are listed as privilege, and systems as disadvantage or oppressed. So you have all these categories, and you can look through them: race, gender, age, religion, sexual orientation, ableism. And the other thing that's interesting I want to mention with abilities or ableism is that there's so many disabilities that are invisible, or not invisible, but they're not visible. And that's challenging in a different way, right? So you want to make sure that you know your students as best you can to serve them in their capacity and in their needs. And nobody is one thing, right? Everybody is a cross section, an intersection of so many different things. Does this make sense? I have a lot of information, so I don't want to go too fast. I just want to give you as much as you can to kind of marinate with, and then you can continue on your own research. Okay, thank you, Foster. Perfect. So privilege. Privilege is, like I said, it's not necessarily a buzzword, but it's a comment right now where people are talking about it. They're talking about privilege. They're talking about white fragility. It's in conversations, but there's tension to it, because when people are accepting privilege or to understand privilege, a lot of times there's a shame or guilt that comes with it. And that's it. The goal is to unpack that shame and guilt and turn it into advocacy, right? Because there's different levels. You could be privileged in some ways and disadvantaged in others. So how can you use your allyship, right? So if you can be an ally. You can't. An ally is a verb. I really believe that, right? You have to do things to be an ally. You can't just say, "Oh, I'm an ally." You have to do things. So how are you supporting your all the youth in your class? And the basic definition is just a privilege exists when a group has something of value. Let me just read this. That is denied to others simply because of the groups they belong to, rather than because of anything they've done or failed to do. And a misconception is some people will say, well, I had to work hard for what I have. This concept doesn't negate anything like that. All it's saying, and it's not based on merit or work ethic. It's saying there are certain struggles you won't have because of how, what a certain group that you belong to. Does that make sense as well?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. All right. So let's talk some language, and this is big. I mean, the language is shifting very quickly. I just read recently the 2019 GLAAD's review of all media, like modern media and representation and diversity. And in their assessment, even in the assessment, it was saying one of the two categories that are weaker are representation of asexuality and bi erasure, which is media's erasure of bisexual identity. That's just one study, but most people, asexuality is still a relatively new term, and so there's so many terms. The language is changing, and we have to do our best to keep up. But students are going to always, just with everything, a lot of them are going to be one step ahead of us. So if there's a new term out there or a concept you don't understand, that's okay. It's what the goal is to, again, allow students to be their authentic self. That's what I like to say, right? Let them be their authentic self. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it or understand it, but you still have to respect their choices and how they wish to identify. But one thing I want to talk about is the basic misunderstanding sometimes between sexual orientation and gender identity. And this is just a couple categories. And this hyperlinks Talking the Talk to a great resource. I'm one of the Welcoming Schools facilitators as well. But it gives you these great definitions. So even with asexuality, ACE is a new shortcut, I guess, for that word. And it's just a term for someone who lacks sexual attraction or desire for other people. And this gives you more words. It also has a list available for students, which is great too. Just putting that out there as a resource. Okay. So I have this graphic that I like to use. Oops. And there's variations of this that you'll see, but this is the genderbread person, and it just shows different categories. The main thing to remember or to understand is your sexual orientation, who you are attracted to or who you love, is different than your gender identity. That's how you feel in your brain. The language for gender identity is male, female, right? Also, when you say transgender, the opposite of transgender is cisgender, CIS, and that's a language that people are using, cisgender. So cisgender is when you identify with this gender you were, the sex assigned at birth. So my sex assigned at birth was female. I identify as female, so I'm cisgender. My sex assigned at birth is female. If I were to identify as male, then I would be transgender. If I don't feel like I'm fitting in either binary, if I don't feel male or female, I would identify as non-binary. That's that whole gray area in between. Now, I was talking to Bobby at the beginning of this, before we started the presentation, and I said I was doing these I've been doing these for a while, and once I was doing this at TCNJ to teachers. There was a educator in their mid-50s who said, I identify as non-binary. And I think that was a very teachable moment, even more so than what I could say, because people associate non-binary as a new term. And while it's a new term, the identity still can apply to people that didn't have the language when they were younger. So this educator said, I was a child of the 70s. I knew I didn't feel like a boy and I didn't feel like a girl, but I didn't have a phrase for myself. And this is the phrase that they're linking into. or they feel like really embraces them. I like to think of, I don't know, in pop culture, you think of figures like Grace Jones or David Bowie or even Prince as almost these pop culture figures that while the language wasn't there, they were non-binary. That's just my opinion. That's not, academic, but does that make sense to help explain those categories?
Mm-hmm.
And there's just as much data out there and statistics that being transgender and gay and transgender and heterosexual. So who you're attracted to is different than your gender identity. Okay, carrying on. So more checklists, more vocabulary. I really encourage you to look through the vocabulary, and where you're human, you're going to make mistakes, especially when students transition and you've had them pre-transition. So Maple Shade's grade 7 through 12, meaning some students I have in middle school all the way through high school. So if you have a student that transitions, and I have had this, 8th grade to 9th grade with like a high school fresh start, it's going to, and you're used to calling them certain pronouns and certain names, it's going to take a little time to adjust. That's okay. We're all going to make mistakes. You would just say, you do your best, and if you use the wrong pronoun, apologize and just correct yourself. It's what you don't want to do is just avoid them or not say anything, right? You want to try your best to use the right language, and especially they and them. That's a difficult pronouns for people to get comfortable with, but it does get easier with practice, and you just follow the student's lead. So it's a small group, so I'm not going to put you in breakout rooms, but I just want you to think about, in your memory, in your experiences, what is your earliest memory of hearing the word gay and hearing the word transgender, or knowing someone who is gay or transgender? And if anyone wants to share out, that would be great.
So my earliest memory of gay is happy, because I'm older.
Okay.
And that would have been in books, used in books and everything like that. I never put it with somebody who, was anything different than happy until later. And transgender is relatively new for me. I would say within the last, 15 years or so. So.
Okay. Anybody else? I see in the chat someone heard gay as a disparaging remark, probably in grade 3. These words, these phrases, they're heard in elementary school, right? Very early elementary school too. And that's why Welcoming Schools has great resources for elementary educators. And I don't know if you're elementary or what everyone's teaching. If you want to change your name, if you can rename yourself, you can also add what you're teaching. And it's an insult, right? Gay is an insult. Anybody else here or have memories of hearing the word or meeting someone who's gay or transgender that they're comfortable sharing out? Looks like a couple of you are unmuting, but I can't hear you. Okay. Early age television, right? So back to, if you're not exposed to it in people around you in your community, right? It's the media is your exposure, and the media, especially early on, it's gotten much better. Again, there's much more representation, but that's very recent. Up until recently, the way people who are transgender are portrayed was very negative. They either were portrayed as victims of violence, like a sex crime or a joke, or in like medical shows, there's some studies where, there's cases like Grey's Anatomy or things like that where they're shown, but then they die from some condition linked to their biological gender. So it's like, you have a transgender man who dies from ovarian cancer. And so there's these trope storylines that are used over and over again, and it's really detrimental to true representation. Now you have 20% of Americans know someone who's transgender. While that's still low, that's much higher than it was years ago, right? I'm sure you all can agree with that. So it's 1 in 5. And as you know, the more people that you know, there's more understanding and acceptance. it's important to use the words gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender in appropriate ways, because what happens is you either hear it as an insult or you don't hear it at all. And that's a problem too, because people need to feel represented. So you want to go to, and I like to say, if you're doing a science lesson and you're talking about Neil Armstrong, and in the science lesson you're talking about Neil Armstrong and his wife, you should be talking about Sally Ride and her partner, right? If you're not talking about any personal history, you don't need to force it into things, but it's just, it's being equitable, right? Because so much of LGBTQ history and queer history is lost. It's just been omitted. Everyone knows Martin Luther King Jr. Few people know Bayard Rustin. Bayard Rustin was Martin Luther King Jr.'s right-hand man. He was a huge leader of the civil rights movement, but he was an openly gay Black man. And MLK said, and the other activists were saying, we can't, your homosexuality will distract from the civil rights movement. Looking at this now, it's really painful to hear, right? But that was bringing his history back. And actually, furthermore, Bayard Rustin there's a center, the Bayard Rustin Center by Princeton in New Jersey, that's named after him. And there's a lot of activism and understanding now, but we're bringing him back into history books because his contributions were dropped because of his sexuality. Again, you're not focusing on people's sexuality, but you're just including it as part of history if it's included in other things. So there needs to be more representation. This is a really great film. It's 12 minutes, so I'm going to encourage you to watch it on your own so I can get more content out to you. It's a phenomenal short film. It's 13 minutes, and it shows the perspective from parents. So when you look at this family picture, what do you see? Oops. Anybody?
Mom, dad, and 2 kids.
Thank you. Mom, dad, and 2 kids, and they look happy. They happy, good. See, so they're this beautiful family. So this family became LGBTQ activists because their child Ryland right here transitioned before kindergarten. And I encourage you to watch this film because Ryland was born female with hearing disabilities. Around 1.5, 2 years old, received cochlear implants. And as soon as the hearing was addressed and his hearing was fixed, he says, I'm a boy. And you know, what they say with transgender children and transitioning earlier is the child persistent, consistent, and insistent. So it's not like, oh, one day I wake up, mommy, I want to be a boy. No, this child is saying, this is who I am. This is who I am. And in the film, you'll see, he says, when my parents die, I'm going to cut my hair. And the mom is crying, and she says, you don't need to wait for us to die to cut your hair. You can cut it right now. And they write a letter to their family members and say, this is the path our child is doing. If you don't support us, you're no longer in our lives. They meet with the kindergarten teachers. And now this is several years old. Ryland is doing really well. He's in middle school, very successful, and has a really supportive family. But the parents weren't advocates for LGBTQ because it didn't affect them. It wasn't until their child transitioned and they had the choice. And the mom says in the film, you know, do I want a living son or a dead daughter? And it's really powerful. So I encourage you to watch this film. But it just shows different families. And it shows from a parent perspective. Okay, so what can you do in your classroom to make it more supportive in your physical classroom and, like I said, in your virtual classroom? We need to create equitable spaces, right? So you have equality versus equity in the classroom. And I'm sure you're familiar with these conversations. Equality is, it's fair, everyone gets an equal amount, versus everyone gets what they need, right? If you give like my example, every person in school gets a t-shirt, Well, if everyone gets a size small t-shirt, what's that going to do? You need something that works with the conditions and supports all students. Oop. So this image I like too, and it's showing the different accommodations. Can you think of an example? Oh, it keeps clicking. Sorry about that. An example in your classroom where something might seem equal, but you really need to do something that's more equitable. You can type in or pause or unpause yourself and chat. Anytime we need to differentiate instruction, absolutely. Okay, keep going. I like this example, and this also talks about a third category. Not all have help, and that's what we're dealing with right now. So in the chat, it's saying resource differential, anytime we need to differentiate instruction and resources at home for our students, not all have help. So especially with the students on virtual learning, how do you know? You don't know so many different factors. You're only seeing them now in these tiny little boxes, and you're trying to create an equitable educational experience for them while not knowing all the other factors going on. So the goal is, this is a third category, which I like. Does anyone know what this third category would be called? So the first image, this is equality. Everybody gets a box. Boom, boom, boom. Same thing. Everybody gets a pencil. Everybody gets a Chromebook. Everyone has a Chromebook. Everyone, we got you all internet. But that's not, that's equal, but is that equitable? Not necessarily. In the second image, this is equitable, right? Individuals are given different supports to make it possible for them to have equal access to the game. The third image, this is called, any guesses? It's called liberation, because all three can see the game without any supports or accommodations. So the cause of the inequity is addressed. The barrier, the systematic barrier, is removed. So that's the goal, right? If you can, and that's not just like boom, boom, we do that in 1 second. That's what all of education is working towards. So this activity, and this is something you can use in your classes, it's called the fourth box. And I've done this with students before, and I really like it. You take this activity, you have the examples that I talked about, you have equality, equity, liberation, right? We'll have them come up with a fourth box. What else could be in that story? One example I can think of is collaboration. In acceptance, what else? What would your fourth box look like? Anybody? If you had to make a fourth box. Participation. Why aren't the kids in the baseball game? Right? So it's anything else? Any thoughts? You students will come up with great ideas, and it's just a good, quick activity to have them. Again, I always encourage, obviously, not obviously, but especially as an art teacher, thinking outside the box and thinking differently, right? So you want to think, and this opens up those conversations. All right, acceptance, good. Anyone else? Any other thoughts? Okay. So the title of the presentation, the core of it, right, is Braver Spaces. Now, I wish I could claim this as with my last name. I've really linked into it for a while. Brave spaces is a thing. Brave spaces are replacing safe spaces, but I take it a step further and I say, let's go for a braver space. So we're going to talk about literally the space. So everyone in here is teaching different things. I'm teaching in a Maple Shade's a hybrid mode. So I'm going in, I have some students in front of me and some on the computer virtually, right? And it's in cohort. So we're all shifting. My typical space, which used to be the art room, is completely different because it's the art room as seen through a little window. So your, depending on what your situation is, your space looks different. But there's still ways to control and adapt your space to make it as supportive as possible for all students. Think about the power of the classroom. And the power of the classroom goes beyond, again, the physical classroom. We want to explore braver encounter spaces. We want to own our space. Okay. This is a graphic I broke up that I really like. Just take a look at this for a minute or so about rethinking power needs and the concept of power. So I'm not going to read it unless someone else wants to read parts of it. So I've been hearing a lot of my voice today. I want to hear your voices. I'll give you just a minute to look through it. Okay, as you're looking, what are your thoughts about power needs and the power teachers have or classroom power? Anything that comes to mind?
I have an actual question. Can you elaborate on express interest rather than praise?
Yes. So we are in part 4 right here of this. So instead of just, okay, ways to help kids meet their power needs. So instead of just saying good job, like I say I'm looking at a drawing, right? And I'm like, okay, I'm sorry, great job. I would say, oh, I really love how you, I love how you added detail to the eyes of that drawing. Great job. So it's just kind of honing in and expressing interest or actually showing that you're tuned into the student instead of a generic like, awesome, wow. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Now, it would, what do you teach?
Oh, I'm a supervisor, social studies.
Right. So, I mean, even if, or for social studies, if you're hearing your teacher saying they're doing group work and it's like nice work or good, that's a great point. That's a great point. I love how it's more of, I guess, elaborating on it too.
Being specific with what they're actually doing.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. And this is just, a visual, but it's just sharing of anything. One of the things I like the most of it is I like that it's, it's not like a remote control, that it's like a candle. So we can share power. There's a bigger movement and excitement and passion for hearing student voice than ever before. And it's not just hearing student voice, there's a collaboration happening in schools. I'm seeing a lot more. It's not just I'm the teacher, I'm the supervisor, authoritarian, right, to share. It's collaborative. So when teachers are presenting information, you want to amplify students' voices. You want to let them have power. Giving them power and giving them more voice and choice doesn't take away from our power, right? It just enhances the experience in education. And I've seen a lot of schools being really successful with this, and just before this, and you could still do it, obviously post COVID. But our district did a lot more student student town halls, like hearing from students, having the principal sit with students instead of just these are the instructions, this is what you're going to do. These are the school rules, this is what you're going to do. It's not saying get rid of all guidelines, but it's having more student input. So there again, the other movement, the other things happening, and this has been happening for a couple years, is replacing safe spaces with brave spaces. When we were in a brick and mortar situation, even then it was changing, because we were saying, with school violence, right? School shootings. Can we really provide, if we're really being honest, can we provide a safe space for students? We don't know all the factors that build a student up, that are layered behind the students as they enter our class. We don't know things happening at home, in their community, with their friends, with their health, right? So we can do the best we can, but instead of saying a safe space, we're going to be more proactive. We're going to be more strong. We're going to make a braver space together. We're going to have courageous conversations. We're going to own our intent and impact. We're going to challenge by choice. We will respect each other. Now with this, I like this, no personal attacks. You are welcome to put your opinions, to attack policy, to attack philosophy or thought, but nobody specifically, no group of people, no personal attacks. And think about the true source of your emotions. These are just some guidelines. I'm going to show you lots of other examples, and then I'm going to ask you to think of your own guidelines for your own space. What do you think are some fears that teachers have that make them hesitant to having these brave spaces or brave conversations? What might stop a teacher from feeling empowered or feeling comfortable to share a brave space or create a brave space? You can unmute or type it in.
There's always a chance you're going to be, they're going to come home with information to the parents, and then you're going to be questioned on why a conversation came up, questioned on what you're saying about it. You know, we don't believe that kids will go home and tell mom and dad, and they'll say, well, we don't agree with that. We don't want that conversation coming up in class. I teach high school, so lots of conversations come up.
Right. So, but that's a big fear. So it's parent response, right? Or anything else? Any other response? Conflict avoidance. Definitely parents. You may not want to offend someone. Absolutely. Or that falls into some teachers feel like they don't have the right language, or they might say something wrong. That goes back into, it's important to address things. Even if you don't have the right language, you don't want to just ignore things. If somebody calls another student gay, right, you don't just ignore it. You got to deal with it or say something. But it's usually administration, school board, parents, and then not confident that you have the right response. So what you need to do is this needs to start with your space, whether it's your class, the teachers you supervise, the district you work for, and use that sphere of influence. That's, you know, who can you work with, and build allyships and advocates, because it will be stronger coming from more teachers, right? And having the support. Now, I have a very supportive district. Maple Shade does a great job, but I know that it's the more teachers that are on board that are saying the same thing and are supporting all students, it helps, and it eventually causes less issues, because students, you know, have greater understanding and empathy for each other. But it can't just be, you know, I'm the only lesbian teacher in my school. I'm the only LGBTQ teacher in the school, and so I can't always just fall on me to deal with every single thing, right? So, but what happens is I have lots of strong advocates and allies in the district that are just as supportive. Similarly, right, when you have issues with race, I'm a white woman, I'm a strong ally, right? So it shouldn't just fall on, you know, the black teacher to be teaching anti-racist thought. That's ridiculous. So you need to think about where your privilege is and be an ally and help create that brave space with your network, because everyone can help in some capacity make every student, you know, again, be their authentic self and be brave.
Yes, I also want to add to that as well, because some educators may not be comfortable with teaching content because they feel as though the content may go directly against their beliefs that they have.
So
relating to LGBTQ.
So what I will say, and that is the case, can be the case with every school, or there's going to be educators and parents and people, community members, and then you're saying, in this school we support all students' authentic self to thrive, and also sexuality is not discussed. What's discussed is, from younger age, what you're discussing is family, love, respect, different types of families, different types of communities. You're not saying, this is better than this, or this is the way to be. You're just saying, you're showcasing different types of families that exist. It's factual, right? There are these different families and there are these different types of students. So whether you agree with them or not, in school, it's their space to thrive. And the benefit, I will say, of the law that passed, and I have that law a little bit later on, I have actually the legislative details from it. The benefit of that law is it's saying that now in New Jersey, you need to include LGBTQ and disability focused or disability inclusive curriculum where applicable in, I think it's grade 7 through 12. So it's not just in history classes, it could be in your English class. So teachers then have the support of saying, I'm following this law, this new, legislation that passed in New Jersey state schools. But if there's, and then there's, again, case by case by case, but when you, there could be some kickback within the educators, but you need to have enough supportive staff. And again, your community members, and you're saying, this is really intentional, this is really powerful. My space is going to be where students can thrive. And you're not changing anyone's religious beliefs, you're not changing their personal beliefs, but you're saying you need to leave just, your beliefs. You can believe what you want at home. Families can believe what they want at home, but in school, you need to support all students as they're, back to the same phrase, their authentic self.
And I like that.
You respect them. You respect students as their authentic self.
Yes, I like that terminology you put. I think that's very powerful, allowing students to be their authentic self.
Right, and that's not projecting anything on your own beliefs. So it's not easy, right? This isn't easy, but there's so much more language. There's so many more resources. And again, I said the law really does help. So that's what's exciting about teaching now versus 5 years ago or 10 years ago, because teachers wanted to have these conversations. But they felt more anxiety about job security or what would happen with the parents. But now, no matter what, again, this new law passed in our state, and this is what we're going to do. This is included in our curriculum. So what you want to do with, and any other questions, please, this is your time for, I will take questions at the end, right? Question and answer. And if you're not comfortable sharing, because, in this group, you can always email me separately. I'm happy to address anything. And this is something that is sensitive, and it's changing constantly. I get emails from parents or teachers whose students are transitioning, or they have a sibling of a student that transitioned and want to support them. So I'm a resource for you in whatever capacity you need. Just putting that out there. So this is just one example, but think about how to use this acronym, this strong acronym, to make your space supportive of students. And I'll show you what I did I made a website for my classes. So I'll show you what I did for art. But be open-minded, relax, go at a slower pace, listen to understand, not to respond. Vulnerability, take some risks. Empathy, try on new perspectives, and respect confidentiality of the stories shared. Now, using the same acronym, and like I said, I taught LGBTQ issues in K-12 education at TCNJ. These are some student acronyms for BRAVE, and you can see their guidelines are different and still wonderful. I really like this one. I like for V, they have validate how others identify. I have this one, be aware of your privilege, voice your common ground, express empathy and kindness. So a lot of teachers are creating brave spaces, even in, whether you have a Bitmoji classroom or your actual physical classroom, using this acronym. The beginning of school, it's really important to set the tone for the year. There's so much uncertainty this year. There's the most uncertainty than any year you've ever taught, because there's literally a pandemic, right? It's of course it's uncertain. So what we can do is saying, and my students start on Monday, and I'm saying we're going to create a brave space, a braver space. You're going to thrive through these conditions. We're going to brave it together, because it's a stronger way of saying, instead of the former language that we were talking about of saying this is a safe space. Okay. I'm going to kind of keep building on the concept of space, and then I'm going to give you a little time to make your own guidelines. This is interesting. This is another graphic from a website called, it's pronounced Metrosexual. And I like this because it says, are you taking up space or contributing to a space? I feel like this could be used, of course, with students, but definitely in faculty meetings and in staff. Think about what you're going to say, right? Before we talk, you always want to say, is it kind? I'm sure you've heard all these other acronyms, right? Is it truthful? Is it important? But are you just talking to talk, or are you taking up somebody else's space? Back to what I said at the very beginning about the gender binary. Say you have this much space, and you're telling young boys to bulk up and take up more space, get stronger, get bigger, and young girls to lose weight, get smaller, and take up less space. It filters into why more boys are called on to answer questions. As teenagers get old, as kids grow up, less female students raise their hand. It's all built into the same concept of who controls what space, right? So this is I like this because you can look through it, answer it, and it kind of helps you just be more mindful of our own contributions to space and conversations. And again, I really like using this metaphor, I guess, of space during these times of COVID, because space can mean so many things, literal or physical, or virtual. And then this was another graphic that came from I think it's the Washington, I'm blocking my own screen here, the Anti-Racist Education Now from Washington. And I liked this phrase as well. So while you're building space, okay, we're leaving safe space. We're getting into braver spaces. Are you taking up or contributing to a space? Now, what does a counter space look like? And I like this too. So you can read through this and just kind of get some ideas. Okay, any other thoughts? So what I want you to do is take these terms, do some reflection, and I want you to actually, now I recommend if I teach digital art as well, Canva, and I'll just pull this up real quick here, is a great resource to create graphic design things. I actually made my own Brave Space acronym for my Google site Classroom for my students. I'll just show you what it looks like. So this is part of the website. So of course, now, obviously I teach art at the high school, but it's saying, and the first day on Monday, I'm going to talk about these guidelines and talk about how we're going to use the space together. As I said, in my specific case, I'm hybrid. So we're going to bring our best. We're going to reach for rigor. Advocacy and artivism. Artivism is a word for visual artists who are activists, who use their art for social change. Voice. I'm going to amplify student voices, but we're also going to be vulnerable. That's how we grow together. Empathy and ethics, etc. So I want you can use Canva. Again, they have great resources. You could just handwrite it on a piece of paper right now. But I am going to give you till 4:30, 8 minutes to digest this because it's a lot. Let me go back to here. And I do want you to just kind of think about, what would your space look like? What does your braver space look like? And you can, we're going to share them out at 4:30. While you're doing that, if anyone has any questions too, I mean, I will take questions at the end, but I want you to kind of process this. You can private message me or just unmute and chat. I'm going to put up so you can see these student examples again, in case you didn't have enough time to read through them. Oops. Okay, a couple more minutes, then I'd love to hear what you've come up with. Okay. Does anyone want to share out what they have?
I'll share it out, but mine's a hot mess.
That's okay. It's okay. I mean, it's just a starting point.
And you're an art teacher, so this is really embarrassing. But
That's okay. Well, I'm not going to grade you.
I'm an English teacher, so I just put authentic me in the center. So brave spaces lead to authentic me. And then I just did the BRAVE around it. And I said, be respectful. Remember to listen first, talk later. Agree to disagree. Validate everyone's opinion. And evaluate whether you're being true to yourself and others' selves.
I love that. So you know, if you find some extra time on your hands, you can go to Canva and you can make it a digital poster that could go into your classroom or, you know, your Google Classroom. But I like that. I like the center, the way you did that as a center. That's the first time I've seen that done. I love that. Thank you. All right, we have one in the you have one in the comments. Be your authentic self, respect others' authentic selves, advocate for authenticity and acceptance, value our differences, I like that, and encourage one another and ourselves. Excellent. Anybody else? Want to share?
Yes, I said, be supportive, respect differences, allow everyone to do his or her very best, vacate intolerance, encourage others to be upstanders, and really put forth an effort to create brave spaces.
I love that. Only one suggestion is to take out the his or her to include non-binary students, and you could just say encourage everyone to do their best. But other than that, perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. I love these. Anyone else? So this and every year you could again retweak these, or you could a lot of times with norms like classroom norms, you ask for student input. So you could have, I don't know if your schools have started, I'm sure your schools have started because we're later than other schools. But as a warm up or get to know student activity, say, how would you define your brave space? And they can obviously do this virtually just as easily as they can do it in person. Oh, we have a couple more that I'll read out from the chat, which are excellent. Be conscious of every student, especially those who have been silenced. Remember, our differences can be used as a powerful tool. Advocate for every type of learner. Voice your ongoing efforts of inclusivity and engage in powerful and purposeful conversation. Oh, I like purposeful too. Excellent. And then be present and non-judgmental. Reassure, ask questions, value and validate, educate yourself, respect others. So you could see how people can add their own flair into this. So it's a great activity. It's a great thing just to get you to think about setting, again, norms and parameters. Anyone else want to share out? These are excellent. So I said this before, I'm really want to advocate and again hit home that an allyship for all students, but again, this presentation focuses on LGBTQ youth, but you have to be an ally. This was an elementary school in New York, Irvington. They did this aerial view, obviously pre-COVID, right? But they all posed and says, we are allies. And it's really important. And an ally is a person who's a member of the dominant or majority group who works to end oppression in his or her personal and professional life through support of and as an advocate with and for the oppressed population. Again, talking to students or creating, as you create your brave virtual spaces, say allyship needs to be an advocacy, authenticity. The A really could be like, whew, really big. It's important. So before we talk a couple of remote tips, this is the bill. This is the actual bill that I was talking about. I said I included it in the presentation that passed. Oh, and actually even in the PowerPoint, it links to the actual description, right? But the key of it, it says the New Jersey, and this is for this school year, the 2020-2021. Boards of education must adopt instruction that accurately portrays the political, economic, and social contributions of persons with disabilities and lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people where appropriate, according to the texts. And that's just, again, saying we're not writing new curriculum, we're just weaving into existing curriculum and making it more inclusive of all these things. I bring back Bayard Rustin. He should be brought back into the history books, things like that. We did an LGBTQ and disability inclusive curriculum audit this summer where we went through all the curriculum and we just saw, what's being taught and where can we enhance things. Teachers don't need one more thing to do, right? Everyone's stretched pretty thin right now, but this is really important. Just because we're stressed because of the pandemic and the way teaching is completely different, you can't negate. You still need to allow students to come as themselves. You still need to, even more so, support all students. And that's why I'm impressed, and I'm happy to see people coming to presentations like this at the beginning of a new year, even when all these other things are going on. It's showing that you're really allies to your students and your staff. For my elementary educators, Welcoming Schools is phenomenal. They have over 54 lesson plans on their website. And it's pre-K to 7th grade. And you can take time and look through this site, picking a category, say you want to look at lesson plans to prevent bias-based bullying. Every lesson comes with, it says what age group it's appropriate for. It also has standards. I'll show you just this one as an example. Has a video. This is great. Bias, bullying, and bystanders. Hold on. I want to show you. Let me show you a different one, actually. Let's do making decisions. This is just what I was talking about, right? Allyship, ally or bystander. So this is the general template for their lessons. And again, there's over 54, which is, I think there's 56 or something. They're still adding more lessons, but it gives you the grade level, suggested length of time, goals, objectives, standards, and they even have educator notes. So I encourage you, when you have more time, to really explore these resources because they're incredible. Oops. For high school, I advocate for using GLSEN, which is the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. They have a lot of lesson plans as well. All right, so how are we going to support remote learners, right? Students right now, because most schools have some students virtual. Some schools I know are completely in person, but that's a little bit more rare. These resources are great. This is from the Human Rights Campaign, and it's in response to COVID-19, a checklist to support LGBTQ students during the distance learning. This gives you some data to look at. And the challenge you have now is that you don't know if a student's, if a gay student's homophobic sibling or parent, right, or guardian is sitting right next to them as they're doing lessons. So there's a lot more uncertainties. You can't control that, but what you can, again, control is the space. And even if they can't be their authentic self at home, which unfortunately and sadly some cannot be, right? They still at least see on the screen when they log into your class for, an hour a day or however it's looking, that you are an ally and an advocate, and that helps. While you can't be with them in person, you can still show your support. So up here, I like these tips here, just checklists to consider as you're building your space. Does your virtual classroom include visible signs like Zoom backgrounds or posters showing that you're LGBTQ affirming? Are you normalizing pronoun sharing by sharing your pronouns verbally or by adding to your name in the virtual platform? Are you creating spaces for students to share their pronouns? So you can see in my name, I always add my pronouns as an ally to the transgender community. That's something you can do. In my emails, I have it at the bottom of my, tagline. So it's important those things help. Are you establishing trust with LGBTQ students by using gender inclusive and non-heteronormative language? Saying, welcome students. I always say, welcome artists. Let's go. Who's excited? I'm not saying, okay, boys and girls, or you send this, or can you have your mom and dad look at this? That's very heteronormative. When I say heteronormative, it just means you're assuming that every child has a mom and dad, which is, every child has completely different family dynamics. One phrase that Welcoming Schools or HRC encourages you to use is there a caring adult at home? I like to use that too. And there's even more tips here. So this links in, someone's adding in. This links into the workshop as well. I mean, I encourage you to explore this sheet. You can print it out as well. It also has the NEA, education junction, and more resources. But one of the things is, the biggest thing really is your virtual background. I know, again, the Bitmoji classrooms, a lot of teachers are making those. Do you have some sort of visual representation? The next resource I provided here is from Idealist, and it's just how to support the LGBTQ community during COVID-19. And it gives you more resources and the explanation. And also links to organizations that are already working and can help students. GLAAD that's what I was talking about when I said GLAAD. They're the ones that did the media review and said that there needs to be more representation for asexuality and less bi erasure. The next resource, and I only have a couple minutes left because I have to do the Q&A, is resources from the Trevor Project. The other element, and again, this is LGBTQ youth, but for everyone, you really need to support. There's a huge mental health crisis happening now. People are much more isolated and separate. While we're connected to more people in some capacity, right, through the internet and you're connected, but you're still connected very superficially. There's less deep conversations happening. There's obviously less contact, face-to-face, human-to-human interaction, and that affects a great deal of mental health, not just for youth, for adults as well, for family members. So this has more information about that. It's another great resource from the Trevor Project. Oops. And then this is another graphic, not just for LGBTQ youth, right, but for tips for teaching online. Again, we have to make our space as strong and supportive for our students as possible, whether it's, okay, brick and mortar, or it's a virtual space. And this is great tips as well. Okay. So I am allotting 15 minutes for our Q&A, but this is being recorded. This will also be shared out. And again, I encourage you to look at the links a little bit more for more details and more resources, because there's more information coming out almost daily about this topic, because since it's in real time, right? We're in real time in this pandemic. It's important that we stay up to date with resources and information. And as a Burlington County network, how can we support each other? Again, my personal email's on here, so you can always email me if you have a specific question that comes up. But this presentation has been adapted to be full day presentations that I've really condensed. And I know a lot of you had a full work day, so I appreciate you tuning in and joining me for this conversation, even after you've had a busy day. So it's showing that you're open and you will be creating brave spaces for your kids, which is awesome. So any general questions?
I have a quick one.
Yes.
You mentioned the GLSEN website.
Yes.
What is how do you spell that acronym?
I'll pull it up right now. It's Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. That's GLSEN. And they have more resources for older students, right? Like I was saying, junior high and high school. And they have great resources. So you can even, they have lesson plans as well. You can see our work. They have educators, and you have lesson plans, inclusive curriculum. They have tons of resources. So the two sites to look at for resources for your classrooms are GLSEN and A Welcoming Schools. Any other questions?
Yes, I know that there have been some schools designated to
Oh, you cut out a little bit. Could you, I'm not able to hear. Could you type in the chat or try again?
Yes, I know that there are some schools that are piloting the curriculum, and I just want to know, are you aware of any challenges that they may be experiencing?
I do know some schools did pilot it, and the other resource, actually, thank you for reminding that, it's Garden State Equality. They're the ones that kind of organize the pilots. I don't think there was any data or information released. There are some more lesson plans released, but I don't think there was data of their challenges. That's something that I can definitely look into and get more information for you. So I'll write that down. And if you want to just drop your email in the chat, but that's a great question. And that's another thing too. I mean, in general with these things, it's okay to say you don't have the answer and just instead of, we don't have all the answers for everything. So it's be comfortable and vulnerable with saying, I'm going to get back to you with the answer. I can, I don't know, but I know who to go to. So but that is a great question. I haven't heard anything, but that doesn't mean that there isn't data on that. And I am curious about that myself. Is that Willingboro?
Yes, Willingboro.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other specific questions? I do know that their lesson plans have been shared out. And again, that would probably be through Garden State. Which is the New Jersey data. Let's see. Okay. Anybody else? Or if again, you can always email me if you have specific questions. If not, I'll just hang on for any private questions or that's my presentation. Again, I did it quickly. I encourage you to also still watch that CNN video about Raising Ryland. That's an excellent film to watch. But if any other questions, I think you're good to go unless there's something from Burlington County's end or BC.
No, Jen, I appreciate everything you shared. I know I personally learned a lot. I wish more people had attended, but certainly they can watch the recording as well. And I encourage everybody who did attend to share it to your colleagues and let them know that they can watch the presentation too. So thank you, Jen, for everything, for this presentation and all the work that you're doing as well. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. I'm going to I'll put my email in here and yeah, encourage your faculty and share the resources. Even the PBS resource is great to look at third and fourth genders.